Welcome to C2GTalk, a series of one-on-one interviews with influential practitioners and thought leaders to explore the governance challenges raised by emerging approaches towards the climate. I'm Mark Turner, C2G's Director of Communications, and I'm speaking today with Youba Sokona, who has over 40 years of experience addressing energy, environment, and sustainable development in Africa, and has been at the heart of numerous national and continental initiatives. Professor Sokona was elected Vice Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in October 2015. Prior to this, he was co-chair of the IPCC Working Group III on the mitigation of climate change for the fifth assessment report after serving as a lead author since 1990. In addition to these achievements, Professor Sokona has a proven track record of organizational leadership and management, for example, as inaugural coordinator of the African Climate Policy Center and as executive secretary of the Sahara and the Sahel Observatory. Welcome, Youba Sokona, to C2GTalk.
Thank you.
So if we could jump into it, how would you characterize the moment, the state of debate and action today to address climate change within broader efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals?
This debate, it depends at which level and then the debate is taking place, because it's at the global level with, big organizations like the UN bodies, different bodies, or at the industrialized country level and in developing countries, particularly in Africa. And then it's not the same debate. And also within the climate discussion, and there is a linkage between sustainable development. But what we see also is that in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the discussions and then the issues is not discussed within the climate discussion, being the negotiation or to other setting. It looked like we are dealing with two different and completely separate issues while they are interlinked.
Why?
As it has been clearly indicated in the various IPCC assessments since the fourth assessment report.
So let's take some of those things. You say they're interlinked. Why do you think that it's so difficult to have those linkages in the international level of conversations? What are the challenges and how do you overcome that?
The challenge is that going back to 1992 at the Rio Summit, we all thought that we approach the direction, the development issues in a holistic manner.
Right.
And this is how the Agenda 21 has been conceived. And slowly we move away from that and then to talk the traditional sectoral silo approaches, such as the Climate Convention, the Biological Diversity Convention, the Desertification Convention, and so on and so forth. And then the discussion of the Sustainable Development Goals outside the context of the development issue. And then starting with the what they call Millennium Development Goals for the developing countries. And then all of them has been a piecemeal and silo and ad hoc interventions rather than taking the problem in a holistic manner as it has been stated in Agenda 21.
So can you suggest ways to get back onto that more holistic track? Because obviously some of the things we're going to discuss about later bring together so many considerations. How does the world start to get back on that way of thinking about things?
The problem is that the type of institution through which we are operating and then we are working did not allow to have a much more holistic approach. And that's one of the deficiencies, because the kind and the type of the issues we are dealing today are completely different from when the association has been set up 50 years back.
Yes.
So that creates a problem unless we bring all those different elements because they are all interrelated. One cannot separate climate issues with development issues. And one cannot separate development issues with climate issues because we need to make development more sustainable. In making development more sustainable, ultimately, we bring in the climate perspective. Even within the climate discussion, when it started, it was only mitigation. It was only economics. And then go back to the IPCC first assessment report, there were hardly mentioned the issue of development, the issue of sustainable development, the issue of adaptation. It's slowly bringing because we realize by the time that we are missing an holistic approach, and then that we need to correct that.
So this upcoming COP26, which is being described as a crucial meeting. All these meetings are crucial, but this one has been given a very big status, as it were, to get the world on track dealing with climate issues. Do you think that it can be a place where we start to see this more holistic approach, or can that start to come in there?
I'm not seeing that emerging. I'm not seeing that emerging because for various reasons. So because I see some discussion, some indication going toward the promotion of some of the approaches, such as the so-called nature-based solution approach,
right,
on the discussion. I have seen also some discussion around, energy transition. It's all of them are related to a certain type of not looking at the real problem and the real issue, and then in order to try to find solution. But at the same time, looking at the IPCC various assessment report, and then if one compares some of the things in the fifth assessment report and the sixth assessment report, there is a huge, improvement addition, because in the previous assessment report, particularly on the mitigation aspect, and then the short term and the mid-term were not explicitly addressed, while in the sixth assessment report, this is explicitly addressed. That means development issue, how to make your development more sustainable, linking to long-term perspective, is captured there. So those are some may, inform some policy making at various levels.
So maybe if I could take one issue that we're very interested in, carbon dioxide removal. So in addition to the essential work of cutting emissions, the IPCC has said large-scale carbon dioxide removal is needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. I'm wondering, how might the world govern various approaches to carbon dioxide removal, nature-based, technology-based, but specifically in light of their potential trade-offs and synergies with the Sustainable Development Goals? How does one start to make decisions about carbon dioxide removal in light of this more holistic approach?
Here again, let me give my personal views and approach to those different issues. Here again, it's silos and sectoral approach. And one has to deal with climate issues, and then how to respond to climate problem, the climate issues. And unfortunately, and then we start looking at, sectoral specific approach rather than approaching this holistic manner, because there is no distinction between mitigation and adaptation. Both need to be looked at the same time. And then unfortunately, the process misleads that some are only interested in mitigation, some are interested in adaptation. Adaptation is much more important. All of them are climate responses. You cannot do mitigation properly without adaptation. You cannot do adaptation without mitigation. And we made a lot of delay in taking concrete actions because, mitigation was almost easier back to 30 years when we started climate talks. It was difficult, but it was much more easier to deal with. And as we did not get in action in enough time, adaptation became prominent, critical, fundamental, not only for vulnerable countries, even in industrialized countries, it became a critical element. And then even adaptation became somehow, in some contexts, impossible. And then there is a number of other elements that need to be looked at. For instance, and then this is what the current discussion, and I think that C2G is dealing with. This is the so-called geoengineering approaches. But the point is, we cannot approach none of those issues in isolation to the others, because adaptation will never function properly without mitigation. Mitigation will never properly function without adaptation. And geoengineering will never function without the two others. So it's in the context of the overall governance of the climate issues that the specific element of each of those three components should be discussed, not in isolation. And this is my personal view on the governance issue and the proper issues. That's because each of them has constraints, each of them have trade-off, limitations, and then we need to better understand those.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Within those three, as it were, categories that you mentioned there, mitigation, adaptation, geoengineering, of course, the term geoengineering means different things to different people and has all sorts of assumptions. And I'm not sure at some stage whether it's meaningful or how, but just to pick one aspect of approaches that sometimes come under geoengineering, this carbon dioxide removal. Do you consider that as something different or a special form of mitigation, i.e., to some extent, carbon dioxide removal is just expanding the old idea of removal by sinks?
There is two aspects of that, because as we said that, and I indicated the geoengineering, there is two aspects of it. One is carbon dioxide removal, and the other one is solar radiation. Some said modification, some said management. And then if we said carbon dioxide removal, there is two approaches on that, the biological approach and the chemical approach. And the biological approach, and then that is enhanced biological approach. This is storing carbon in land, and then or storing carbon in the ocean. Those are the two biological approach. To a certain extent, those are related to what in the IPCC context is considered as mitigation. And then the chemical approach is different because that is related to accelerated watering or the direct air capture and then with storage. And then those are quite different. And then one have to have a clarity and distinction between those, because the knowledge gap, the understanding and the perspective are completely different by considering those, even if you take the biological approaches on the land-based and the ocean-based. And then we need to have a clear understanding and then a clear all aspects related to those value aspects in order to approach how we deal with their governance in the context of the governance of climate responses.
So taking these two approaches, you identified the biological and I guess the technological. Do you see what sort of level of debate do you see in the global South in general and in African fora about these approaches and how might some of those potential debates be enhanced, improved and so forth?
The problem is, unfortunately, as at the global level, despite the fact that within the scientific findings, and then that give some information to policy making and the implementation, despite the fact that there is a lot of evidence, and the discussion are highly taking place at the global level, and then without looking at the regional implications, because decisions are not taken at the global level. They're taken at local, national levels. But those conversations are not taking place. We have no idea of those different perspectives at the regional level. This is one element. Second element, and there is a lot of issues where we do not have a clear understanding, a lot of gaps. I can list many of those. You will find in a piecemeal approach, but not a much more coherent approach on that, because of the efficiency, and then the feasibility, the scalability, and then the sustainability, and then so on and so forth. But unless you look at carefully those different aspects, not at the global level, but at the much more regional and national level, and then we will only, repeating the same rhetorics on this can be done, and then this is the way to go, and then without considering also the two other aspects. Because if you are in the context of industrial economy, and in the context of developing countries, because there is a wide range of developing countries, the LDCs and the others, how you approach those different issues are completely different. How you approach sustainable development in the context of those three categories of countries are completely different. How you approach the climate issues are completely different, even if the ultimate objective at the end, they all need to converge to, responding to the climate in a much more sustainable manner.
So do you see any things that could be done in the near term to enhance this conversation in, let's say, the African region, and within that, different types of countries that you identified? Are there any specific steps that should be taken now, do you think, to make learning, improve learning and discussion?
I think that there is two different aspects related to, the various clusters that need to involve in this conversation. Broadly, we have the policy cluster of actors, those who are setting the policy at the various levels, from the local to the national to the regional. And then we have the knowledge cluster, and then that's those who are generating knowledge, assessing knowledge, and then rooted in the regional and the national context. And then we have the practitioners. And then we need to have a conversation within those three different groups. And then if you look at all the issues related to what you indicated as carbon dioxide removal, I do not see in the knowledge cluster a real work that has been undertaken for various reasons, maybe related to the funding, maybe related to capacity, maybe related to institution, but this needs to be done in order for them to engage to the three other clusters, the policy and then the practitioner cluster. And then to look at also the policy cluster, the conversation is not only taking place preeminently, it's only at the best cases when they have the opportunity to attend a COP or when they have the opportunity to attend a big meeting, but not part of their policy-making agenda. And then that will take time. We need to invest on that. On the practice also, because the carbon dioxide removal, it is not something new, because we know it, and there are a number of experiences, but at a very small scale level. And then the issue here is how to go beyond the small scale to the massive one. And then those are a huge other implications. And then that need also to bring to them some of the things they are doing, some of the experience they have can be part of these climate responses. And then those are not taking place at the national level, they are not taking place at the regional level, they are only taking place at the very global level. And then we need to bring those different elements, as someone said it, down to the earth, to the reality of the context, because context matters.
On the issue of one form of solar radiation modification proposed approach, which is stratospheric aerosol injection, one of the aspects of this is perhaps unlike many other climate interventions, it could theoretically be deployed relatively quickly at a relatively lower price by, you know, a group of countries with an impact that affects everybody. Do you think it would ever be possible for there to be a global, regional, national level of conversation that leads to a fair decision about deployment or not of something that works like this? And I'm also wondering, as these sort of various considerations go ahead, do you actually already see potentially instances where powerful civil society organizations in the North or particular governments are already framing the debate about this potential approach and technology? And how do actors in the global South start to influence that debate?
Maybe I did not make myself be clear or explicit enough, because you cannot take that in isolation to the two other responses. At the current level, and then what need to be done and should be done in mitigation. Because, you know, if we stop emitting greenhouse gases today, we'll be continuing having the raising of the temperature. And what will be also adaptation requirement, and in addition to those two different elements, what can be done in what you indicated and coming from the solar radiation management or modification. You cannot take one aspect, because that will mislead. It will give the impression that this is the solution. It's a substitute of the two others. Because, you know, the mindset are, and we are dealing also with the policymakers at various levels. And then we are dealing with many people who do not understand the interlinkages of those different aspects. And then this is why I indicated we need to bring those in a holistic manner. For the current situation, at the current level, at the current the current effort, those are the three different elements. Those can be done at that level, and with the different consequences. But to take only part of that will be a bit misleading.
Of course.
At least my views on that.
Of course, and you have been very eloquent on that. I guess I was wondering, in a world of unfair power relationships, whether you see a risk that one group hijack this conversation and bypass that process that you're talking about.
We had experience on that in one have to learn also from the experience we had with nuclear power. Because, you know, the decision of there is a big risk at the world level, just the proliferation of the nuclear weapon. This is an obvious key question. But who is controlling the possible or the non-possible is a few number of countries. Is it fair? I don't think so. But it can be done for sure, because we have no idea how the proliferation will take place. And then this is a kind of dilemma. And then to be fair, to be equitable, and then to consider the ethics at the same time, and then controlling the risk. And then those are the things we need to also to consider in any kind of emerging technology that we know enough and then to explore, and that we don't know enough on intended consequences. So we have to be very careful and then not give to few countries that will dominate. They are dominating the economy, they are dominating the decision-making at global level. We will not reinforce that dominance on the global system while we are dealing with common good issues.
Perhaps I could wrap up on a personal note. You spent a long time in this field. The more people learn about the challenge, it could start to feel quite depressing and crushing, some of the level of the challenges. At the same time, people manage to maintain hope. So how do you think the world maintains hope while recognizing the gravity of the situation? And what personal philosophies do you turn to help guide the way you think about these challenges?
I think that back to 30 years, in the early days of climate discussion, conversation with the director of C2G, Janos Pastor, and then we tried together and to promote one of the critical articles of the convention, which is Article 6. Article 6 about information, communication, education on a continuous basis, because we need to change our behavior in order to cope with climate issues, but behavioral change will take time. And I was a bit desperate, but during the past few years, I have seen the school kids going out of school, engaging, and then dealing with the issue. And then this is a kind of awareness raising for the people at the lower level. In '92, I tried to bring the African Minister of Environment and then to consider climate issues. They told me, don't waste our time. This is not an issue for developing countries, this is an issue for industrialized countries. At that time, they do not understand it. In the Paris summit, almost all the head of the state of Africa were there. And that means awareness has been taken. And the African head of the state and government, they set up a committee on climate change. They have not set up a committee on desertification. They have not set up a committee on development issues. So that means, awareness is getting momentum back. And lastly, I thought that it might be very difficult to change behavior in a short, limited time. That will take generations. But experiencing COVID indicated to me that that can be done far, far faster than we thought. I used to travel a minimum to take a minimum 3 times a flight a month. For the last year, I only took flight once, and then to move from Geneva to Bamako. So that makes some hope.
Youba Sokona, thank you so much for joining us on C2GTalk. Thank you.
So it was my pleasure.